Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Launch and Learn series. This is a technical one, so you have to you have to be ready, embrace the learning for today. Like I said, the Launch and Learn, it's about sharing your experience, is about sharing maybe past projects you've worked on that you feel like others needs to know, other people needs to know about. And not just that, it's also a way to collaborate and start the knowledge sharing, because at the end of the day, um, knowledge is going to get really obsolete very, very fast if you are not sharing them and learning from each other. Okay. So the idea is not to teach you. So don't expect me teaching you anything, but more or less showing you one or two things that might be helpful maybe in your next project, if at all you're engaged in any project. So today we are going to work on the SendBed integration with Service Cloud. But our focus for today, I call it part one because it's a lengthy process, and I don't want to overwhelm you guys with a lot of information. So we're going to break it down into two parts. The first part is actually understanding Postman, how to use Postman. And the second part will be omnichannel, understanding omnichannel, how to set it up. Once you have those two things in place, then SendBed will become easier to integrate. The reason why are we learning this, by the way? Why do I want to share this with you? I want to share this with you because I think the direction is very obvious, right? Direction Salesforce is taking you guys to is live agents. And omnichannel is a fundamental of live agents. Yes, you have the flow, you have the agent force, but there's still omnichannel that is powering everything. So if you want to be good at all this agent force and the likes, then perhaps you might want to learn omnichannel, and you might want to learn how to interact with Postman. So let's start with Postman. Let's start with Postman. So now, what is Postman? What is Postman? Postman is like a tool that helps you to access web APIs. Okay. So it's not like Salesforce. So don't think Postman is like Salesforce. It's not like Salesforce. However, with Postman, you can integrate, you can connect, you can access information that it's residing in a database. So what do I mean by that? If you have an API, so for instance, I've been able to retrieve bunch of Salesforce APIs. So these are Salesforce APIs, okay? So if you have an API, you want to find out what is in the API. So by API, I mean application programming interface, which is the interface that an application is built with. Okay. So if you look at Salesforce, for instance, let's say we have the service console. Okay. And not even that. Let's go to objects. I'll come back to the service later on. Let's go to the objects. So the Salesforce, you have the account object, for instance. Okay. So this account object is an object. An object is like a table, right? It has information that is being stored. Okay. Then if you have another object, let's say contact, that's also an object, or case. It's also an object, and it stores information. When you relate accounts and case together, or you relate account, case, contact together, you're building what I call a model. Okay. You're building what I call a model. How data comes in and out of this model is now up to you, the way you want to design it. For instance, you have the fields and you have the type of data that goes into those fields. Okay. So when it comes to API, the API describe how this account object is structured such that if anyone wants to communicate with the account, case, or contact object, then they will be able to communicate knowing that there are some fields called name, account number, owner ID, and the likes in the account object. So how do I pass in the name, account number, owner ID in the account object? I can pass in this information because I know what the API is. So API, again, is the interface which you use or which a developer has created to communicate with the model that they've established within the application. So this is an application, for instance. The service console is an application, and it has models, tables in it. So for you to get data into this table, you need to know the communication channel. How do you get data into the account object? Now, the beauty of the API is this, right? Once you design or you develop the API, anyone can now communicate with that API such that they don't even need to know Salesforce. They just need to know that, oh, we want to get data into this account object, into this case object. How do we get data? The interface. You know, when you go to America and when you go to Europe, the plug you have to connect power is usually different, right? You know, in Europe, you have the 2 mouths. In America, I think you have the 4 mouths. And in UK, you have the 3 mouths. That interface that enables 2 plugs to get into a 2 plug mouth and the likes is what this is all about. So you are creating a structure that anyone that understands that, oh, this is a 2 plug. And what is the plug? It has these fields, this field, this field. So if I can match all these fields, I'll be able to connect. That's all. Okay? I hope that kind of like makes sense. So from a Salesforce point of view, these are the APIs that make Salesforce what it is. I'll explain this API shortly. But let's get into Postman itself. What is Postman? Postman is a way to retrieve or communicate, send or retrieve data based on the API design or development. Okay? So with API, with Postman, you have what they call the workspace. What's a workspace? A workspace is the workspace. You know, when you have a workspace, you have a section that is dedicated for your communication. So you might be wondering, how did I get here? I just got here by just typing a Postman. Okay? So you don't need to, like, this is how you get Postman. Because I'm logged in, that's why I can see this. If I'm not logged in, let me try to, I wanted to use Incognito. I'm not sure if the screen will be shared. I believe you can still see my screen, postman.com. Okay? So this is what you're going to see. You were not logged in. Then when you logged in, you can now see your environments. Okay? So now that we've logged in, typically Postman, you can download it on your computer. Okay? You can download it on your computer and use it directly from your computer. But if you're always on the move, it's better for you to work directly from the internet because you can log into any computer and start using your collection. Okay? Now I've said something called collection. So what is a collection and why do we need a collection? Before we get to collection, let me just kind of like walk you through this. There's what they call the workspace. Workspace is like your area of work. What does that mean? It means that if you're working with, let's say, PwC, Deloitte, and the likes, and you're also working some side gig, you don't do all PwC work in the workspace. You create a workspace for PwC work. You create a workspace for Blackforce. You create a workspace for whatever project you're on. So workspace define your current project in a given environment. Okay, so don't just start working randomly in Postman. Always collect or always organize like a folder. Always organize what you're doing and make sure that it is well structured. Okay, that's a workspace. Then when you create a workspace, let's say, for instance, we've created this workspace. Okay. Then we have what they call environment. Environment is very crucial. Why is it crucial? It's crucial because your environment will determine how you store variables that are important for your workspace. And it also helps you eliminate repetition. Okay? I'm going to give you the examples very soon, but I want you to understand why we are having this session. Environment gives you the opportunity to separate. Let's say you want to connect to an API. You need a password. You need a username. You can segregate those information based on environment such that one environment would have a particular username and password. Another environment will have a particular username and password. Let me give an example. Sandbox. If you have sandbox A, sandbox B, and production, you don't want to test production data with sandbox data, or you don't want to try messing around with production. So what you typically do is you set up production environments, sandbox A environment, UAT environment. Okay. So that's environment. Environment is just separating credentials, URL, or anything that is applicable to a particular environment. In IT world, environment is pretty much your area of work. Don't mistake that with workspace, okay? So now that you have that, there's also what I call new, and there's what I call import. What is new? New is essentially when you want to make a call. Okay, you can make a call using, we're not going to even go to advanced call. We're going to just stick to HTTP. HTTP is like the typical web verbs that you can use to make a call, right? Advanced one is when you're using WebSockets, Socket.io, and the likes. And if someone gave you a collection, you can import that collection and bring it into this environment or workspace. So you don't have to recreate any APIs that you've been given. You import it into the environment and you start working, okay? So that's pretty much the postman. And when it comes to HTTP verbs, we have what they call the get, we have what they call the put, we have what they call the post, we have what they call the patch. There's patch, there's put, there's delete as well. What does that mean? It means that if you click on this item and you want to edit, you are calling what they call HTTP verb. Okay? When you carry out any action, you are literally calling a verb. So if the verb is to update, you're calling the patch verb. If the verb is to create, if you want to create a new record, you're calling the post verb because you're posting information into the API. If the verb is to delete, you're calling an action. Okay, so whatever. So I've given you like 3 examples, but all these are actions. And whatever the system wants to do is what you will set for those actions. But you can only have like 4 fundamentals, which is the get, you want to get information. The post, you want to post information, you want to create information. The put or patch, you want to update information. The delete, you want to delete an information, okay? So when you do that, you are literally communicating. So the postman is independent of Salesforce, okay? So this is Salesforce. This is Postman. How do you communicate with Salesforce and Postman? We're going to get there. But what I've just explained to you is the get, post, put, patch, delete, add option. I don't know about all this, but you don't really use them. The ones you use is the get, post, patch, and delete, okay? We're going to see an example of how that works. But before you start communicating, there's what they call params. What are params? Params are just the query parameter. When you want to edit this information, you see, this is account name is a parameter. Account number is a parameter. Rating is a parameter. And inside that parameter, you have the value. Okay, you have the value. So what does that mean? You can pass in parameters either on the URL, or you can go to the body and pass in the parameters you need. So they call it key and value. Key and value. You can either pass it this way, or you can pass it using raw and just use your normal JSON. Okay, they call it key and value. Okay, so you can pass it using the JSON. You can pass it using the S form, key and value. You can pass it using the whatever way you want to pass it. You can pass it in the body, or you can pass it in the params. When you pass it in the params, it's usually in the header. So let's say you have sample.com. So param, name equals account name. Can you see? So that name and account name is now the param you pass into the URL. Automatically, it gives you that. You can also keep adding stuff. You can put you can continue and say and. Okay, and means that you're done with the first param. Then you say site or number equals 1, 2, 3. Can you see? Anytime you want to add more params, you just put and, right? And it gives you another things like another key, another value. Okay? So that's it. That's how you can play around with Postman. Anytime you play around with Postman, or anytime you put in the params and the key and the URL, you press what they call send. And when you click on send, you typically get what they call a response. Okay? A response. This response will tell you what's the outcome of the API call you've just made. Typically, you have what they call status code. Status code for API. There are different status code you can have for API depending on the sources of failure of the API. There's what I call the 1XX, the 2XS, and the likes. So the typical one is 200 OK, which means that your API is successful.
Sorry to cut you short.
Yes.
Someone is saying, seems the audio isn't working. I can hear you clearly. I presume every other person can hear you. I don't know. Just to reconfirm, I believe everybody can hear. You can go ahead.
Okay. Okay, I think I'm audible. You can hear me. That's good. Okay. So 200 OK means that the status, the API call you made was successful. As you can see, this is 404. 404 means that it's not found. It's a bad request, because obviously it's a bad request. Nothing like this exists. That's why it's a bad request, right? If it wasn't a bad request, it would have been green. Okay, it would have been green and to be successful. So if you have 404 error, it means that the thing you type here, the API doesn't work, or the verb is not applicable to the API. Okay, the verb is not applicable to the API. So this response session is very important. Okay, typically this is what you get to see. Okay, and once you type in the stuff, you click on send, a response will come. Okay, so given that understanding, we can now say we have I would say a foundation. Okay, a foundation of playing around with APIs and Postman, because there's nothing much to it. There's what I call the save. So if you want to repeat this request every time, you can save this request. And once you save this request, you put it under your collection. Okay. And anytime you come back, you'll be able to see that request. Okay. You'll be able to see the request. That's all you need to know regarding API. So now, let's say we have an object in Salesforce because the goal is to connect our Salesforce and Postman together. How do we do that? Let's start from the basics. We have Salesforce developers collection, which you can download on the internet. Okay, so how do you do that? Salesforce developer collections. Okay, so you can go to Postman developer collection is a public um public collection that is available and it's owned by Salesforce. Okay, and you can see everything like every company, every object in Salesforce has an API. So you can send data into account, you can send data into contact based on that API collection. Okay. And I'm sorry, it's a bit technical, but I wouldn't want to go into the technical side of things. I would just want to keep it very, very soft. Okay. So you can check the API. You can just download the API, just type it API developer, and you can run it in Postman. Okay. When you run it in Postman, there's what I call fork. It's not fork like FCUK, it's FORK. Okay, so you're recreating the collection. So you cannot work on the Salesforce collection itself, but you recreate your own sample Salesforce collection. Okay, and you can put it in the workspace you've created. Then you click on FORK. Okay. So once you've created that, you now have a replica of the Salesforce collection. Okay. Once you have the replica of the Salesforce collection, then you can now start playing around with it. So the first thing first is this. You want to authorize. What does authorization? What does it mean? What does it mean? When it comes to authorization, you want to authenticate the API so that the API can now say, oh, this is the org that you're referring to. Do you get what I mean? This is the org that you're referring to because you want to communicate with that org. How do you communicate with the org? You want to make sure that when you authenticate your API, it's connecting to the Salesforce org that is open. Okay? It's connecting to the Salesforce org that is open. So how do you ensure that? You have your Salesforce API, okay, which is this. Then you go to authorization. When you go to authorization, you will see all these type of authentication. There's what they call inherit auth from parent, because this is the parent. You don't need to inherit anything. This is no auth, meaning that it is not authenticated. This is basic auth. Basic auth is like your basic username and password. Okay, we cannot use username and password, but basic auth is like username and password. Bearer token is when you have access token. Because we're not authenticated yet, we cannot use access token. Okay, but if you have access token, you can directly connect to your Salesforce org. But recommended by Salesforce is OAuth 2.0. So OAuth 2.0 will give you all the things you need to connect to your Salesforce org. If I click on OAuth 2.0 and I go down, I click get new access token. Remember I told you access token, right? Access token is that token that authenticates you into this org so that you can now start talking to this org. Okay? Remember, you FORK Salesforce Platform API, you go to authorization. This is very important. Click at the top. Don't click on anything here. Just click at the top here. Authorization. Then you click on get new access token. It says authentication failed. Couldn't complete authentication. Check the Postman console for more details. Field console. Invalid host for the URL. So it's telling me that there is invalid host for the URL, which is fine. I'll just go back to let me look at this. Authorization, get access token. Okay. So I think we downloaded something different, but this is the Salesforce collection. Okay. As you can see, just like when you're connecting to App Exchange and Connected App, you're now authorizing Postman to log into your Salesforce.